Good evening, everyone. I'm thrilled to have you join me tonight. Sit back, relax, and prepare yourself for a chilling tale of the supernatural, one that will make you question the boundary between the living and the dead. Let me take you back to the summer of 2002, a time when I was preparing for my final exams in high school, an experience that turned out to be unforgettable in more ways than one. It was late at night, around 11 p.m. There I was, diligently working on my practice tests. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. You know how it is. Studying late at night always makes you sleepy. Despite my best efforts to stay awake, exhaustion got the better of me. My head drooped, and soon I was fast asleep at my desk. I don't know how long I was out, but suddenly a chill ran through me, jolting me awake. Groggy and disoriented, I glanced at the clock. It was just past midnight. I decided it was pointless to continue studying and that a trip to the bathroom and then to bed was in order. I moved quietly through the house, careful not to wake my father, who was already asleep. As I crossed the dimly lit living room, a strange sensation washed over me. A cold breeze that seemed out of place in the stillness of the house. My first thought was that a window must be open. I turned toward the balcony to check, and that's when I saw it. A figure stood there, bathed in the pale moonlight. My heart skipped a beat. It was an old woman. For a moment, I thought a burglar had broken in. My mind raced, and fear sharpened my senses. But then I took a closer look. The woman wasn't just any stranger. It was my grandmother, Elizabeth. She looked just as she did the last time I saw her, with a gentle smile and kind eyes. I was bewildered. What was she doing here? Standing on the balcony in the dead of night? I called out to her softly, "Grandma?" She didn't respond. Instead, she turned to look at me fully, her expression warm and tender. I felt a strange mix of comfort and confusion. Maybe she'd come from the countryside to surprise us. But why hadn't she told anyone? And why was she out on the balcony? I moved closer, but before I could reach her, a gust of wind blew the curtains, momentarily blocking my view. When the fabric settled, she was gone. The balcony was empty. Panic surged through me. I rushed outside, scanning every corner, even peering over the railing to the ground below. Nothing. She had vanished into thin air. I was left standing there, shivering not just from the cold, but from the eerie encounter. My mind raced with possibilities, but none of them made sense. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, or my exhausted brain playing tricks on me. I hurried back inside, locked the doors, and crawled into bed, though sleep was the last thing on my mind. The night dragged on, filled with restless tossing and turning, my thoughts a tangled mess. Morning came too soon, announced by my blaring alarm clock. I dragged myself out of bed and joined my dad for breakfast. He immediately noticed my haggard appearance and asked if I was okay. I hesitated, but then decided to share the bizarre encounter from the previous night. As I described what I had seen, my dad's face grew pale. His eyes widened with shock, and he dropped his fork. He looked at me, his voice trembling, and said, "I have something to tell you." He explained that Grandma Elizabeth had passed away the previous night. She had fallen at her home in the countryside. My parents had kept the news from me, not wanting to distract me from my studies. My mother wasn't on a business trip. She had gone to attend the funeral. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. My grandmother had died, yet I had seen her, felt her presence, just hours after she had passed. It wasn't a trick of the light or my imagination. It was real. She had come to see me one last time, to say goodbye. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I went through the motions, attended classes, and tried to focus, but my mind was elsewhere. The comforting smile of my grandmother haunted my thoughts. After my exams, I traveled to the countryside to pay my respects. Standing by her grave, I felt a sense of peace. I knew she was watching over me, even in death. And so, my friends, that's my story. A reminder that sometimes love transcends the boundaries of life and death. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, and may it leave you with a sense of wonder, and perhaps a little chill down your spine. Have a good night, and remember, the next time you feel a chill or see a fleeting shadow, it might just be a loved one stopping by to say hello. Welcome, dear audience, to a tale of eerie occurrences and spine-chilling encounters. This story delves into the unexplainable, where the boundaries between reality and nightmare blur. Join me as we explore the harrowing experience of our protagonist, James, whose ordinary night at the office turned into an unforgettable ordeal. James had just graduated from college and, like many of us, was thrown into the harsh reality of the job market. After weeks of searching, he finally secured a position as an office assistant in a generic company in the bustling city of Grandview. Despite the job being more of a catch-all role, often involving menial tasks, James was relieved to have found work. One particular evening, feeling under the weather from a cold, James took some medication and inadvertently dozed off at his desk. He awoke to the sound of the office door creaking open. Startled, he glanced around but saw no one. The heavy glass door was closing on its own, an unsettling sight since it usually required a significant effort to move. Trying to shake off the eerie feeling, James decided to get some water. As he sipped, the office lights suddenly flickered, and then two of the overhead lights went out. He muttered to himself about his bad luck, but before he could react further, the remaining lights went out with a series of loud pops, plunging the office into complete darkness. Only the flickering glow of his computer screen remained, its display filled with bizarre jumping symbols. Panic set in. James's heart raced as he darted out of the office, heading towards the elevator. He felt an overwhelming sensation of being followed, prompting him to repeatedly press the elevator button. The moment the doors opened, he dashed inside and anxiously waited for them to close. Just before they did, he heard footsteps approaching. Relief washed over him as the elevator finally descended. However, his relief was short-lived. Midway down, the elevator lights flickered and went out. James braced himself against the wall, expecting the worst. Fortunately, the lights came back on, and the elevator resumed its descent. When it reached the ground floor with a soft ding, James sprinted out, desperate to escape. He paused, panting, and realized he was not in the familiar lobby of his office building. Instead, he found himself on a barren, reddish plain with steam rising from the ground. Panic-stricken, James looked around, trying to comprehend his surroundings. The elevator doors closed behind him, snuffing out the last source of light. In the oppressive darkness, a foul, damp odor pervaded the air. From the shadows, figures began to emerge, grotesque, nightmarish apparitions that encircled him. Fear gripped James as he realized there was no escape. The spectral figures closed in, their ghastly faces contorted in malevolent grins. Just as the horror reached its peak, a bright light enveloped James. He blinked, disoriented, and found himself back in the office, daylight streaming through the windows. His colleague Mike was shaking him awake. "James, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. You can't stay here all night. It's not healthy." Stunned, James stumbled to the restroom to splash water on his face. As he gathered his thoughts, he overheard the cleaning lady grumbling loudly about someone tracking mud everywhere. He turned and saw a trail of red mud leading directly to him. His heart raced as he stared at the muddy footprints, realizing they matched the ones from his nightmare. Shaken to his core, James couldn't comprehend what had just happened. Was it a dream, or had he truly crossed over into another realm? The red mud suggested that his terrifying experience might not have been a mere figment of his imagination. And so, dear audience, James's unsettling experience remains a mystery, a tale that blurs the lines between dreams and reality. Thank you for joining me on this eerie journey. Remember, some doors, once open, are best left unexplored. Stay safe, and may your nights be free of such terrors. Until next time, keep your curiosity alive, but tread carefully, for the unknown often lurks closer than you think. Hello, dear listeners. Gather around and make yourselves comfortable. For tonight, I have a spine-chilling tale that will make you think twice about staying in a hotel room at the end of a long, dark corridor. This is the story of Jack and Emily and their unforgettable encounter with the supernatural. Hold tight and let the terror unfold. Jack and Emily had been dating for a few months when they decided to take a trip together. It was the perfect opportunity during the holiday season, and they chose a quaint little town far from the hustle and bustle of city life for their getaway. After a day full of exploring, they were exhausted and just wanted to find a place to rest. Little did they know, their choice of accommodation would lead to a nightmarish experience. Despite the holiday rush, they got lucky and found a vacancy at a budget hotel. It was late in the evening, and the hotel had only one room left. Jack was thrilled at their luck and paid for the room without hesitation. As he received the key, his heart skipped a beat when he realized their room was at the end of a long, dimly lit corridor. He remembered hearing tales about the ominous nature of such rooms, but he brushed off his unease, not wanting to seem superstitious in front of Emily. They reached their room, and to their surprise, it was exceptionally clean. It seemed like a good sign, and they settled in quickly. However, Jack's unease returned when he noticed a curtain drawn tightly across one wall. Assuming it was a window, he pulled it back, only to find a solid wall behind it. Emily shrugged it off, saying it was probably just a quirky decoration. Still, an inexplicable sense of dread began to gnaw at Jack. Exhausted from their day's adventures, they soon fell asleep. But in the dead of night, Jack was jolted awake by Emily's piercing scream. He shot up to find her sitting upright, staring at the curtain-covered wall. She whispered that she had seen a shadowy figure behind the curtain. Jack tried to calm her, reasoning that it must have been a trick of the light. He got up to use the bathroom, hoping to shake off the eerie feeling. As he stood in front of the bathroom mirror, something caught his eye. Reflected in the mirror was the curtain in their room, and behind it, a dark, shadowy figure. Jack's blood ran cold. He spun around, but there was nothing there. Gathering his courage, he returned to the room and pulled the curtain back again. It was just a wall, nothing more. He told Emily she must have imagined it, though his voice wavered. They tried to sleep again, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, when suddenly he felt an oppressive weight pinning him down. His body was paralyzed, only his eyes could move. And there, emerging from behind the curtain, was the shadowy figure, moving with a terrifying grace. The figure drifted to the table, where it seemed to eat the remnants of their dinner, before settling down in front of the TV. The screen flickered to life, showing nothing but static. Jack's terror peaked when the figure turned and glided toward him. It leaned over him, its face an indistinct mass of darkness. He could feel its cold breath on his skin as it stared into his eyes. Time seemed to stretch into eternity. Jack's muscles were taut, drenched in sweat, but he couldn't move or cry out. The shadow eventually drifted away, melting into the wall, and Jack's paralysis slowly ebbed. Dawn's light filtered through the window, breaking the spell of the night. Jack shot up, drenched and trembling. He shook Emily awake, desperately asking if she'd experienced anything. She looked at him with confusion, saying she'd slept soundly after her initial fright. Jack looked around the room. The leftovers on the table had clearly been disturbed, and the TV was on, showing static. They quickly packed their things and checked out, not daring to spend another minute in that room. The rest of their trip was a blur as the memory of that night haunted Jack. From that day on, no matter where they traveled, they avoided hotel rooms at the end of the hallway. And so, dear listeners, remember this tale the next time you check into a hotel. Jack and Emily's experience serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the darkest shadows lie just beyond the curtain. Thank you for joining me tonight. Sleep well, and may your nights be free of shadows and whispers from beyond the wall. Hello, dear listeners. gather around and get comfortable because I have a spine-chilling tale to share with you tonight. This story is one that has been whispered among truck drivers for years, a haunting reminder of the dangers lurking on deserted roads. So, buckle up and prepare yourself for a journey into the unknown. Our story begins about 20 years ago in a small, unassuming town nestled in the heart of the countryside. Back then, if you were a skilled driver, especially of long-haul trucks, you could earn a pretty penny. Our protagonist, a young man named Jack, was just shy of 20 and had recently started working for a local business owner. His mentor was an experienced driver named Mr. Johnson, a man who had seen it all, or so he thought. Jack and Mr. Johnson often chose to drive at night. The roads were quieter, and they could avoid various checkpoints and inspections. On one such night, they set off on a long journey through winding mountain roads, shrouded in darkness, with horsepower only the truck's headlights, piercing the inky blackness. These roads, carved into the side of the mountains, had no streetlights and were notorious for their eerie atmosphere. For seasoned drivers, the most dreaded encounters were not with the rough terrain, but with the supernatural. As they drove, Mr. Johnson shared some of his wisdom with Jack. He warned him about the perils of driving at night in these parts, speaking of the things that could go bump in the night. He mentioned that if anyone tried to flag them down, it was best to keep driving. Those who appeared out of nowhere on these desolate roads were either up to no good or worse, not of this world. Jack listened intently, his eyes darting to the dark, twisting road ahead. Suddenly, without warning, Mr. Johnson slammed on the brakes. The truck screeched to a halt, and Jack's heart raced as he turned to see what had caused such an abrupt stop. Mr. Johnson's face had turned ghostly pale, his eyes wide with terror as he stared straight ahead. "Did you see them?" Mr. Johnson's voice was barely above a whisper. Jack squinted into the darkness, straining his eyes, but saw nothing unusual. "See what?" he asked, confused. "There were two children right in front of us," Mr. Johnson said, his voice trembling. "They were playing in the middle of the road." Jack looked again, but saw only the empty, desolate road. "I don't see anything, Mr. Johnson." Mr. Johnson's eyes never left the spot where he claimed to have seen the children. They were there, two little kids, but they had no eyes, just dark, empty sockets. A chill ran down Jack's spine. He had heard stories, but he never truly believed in ghosts or spirits. He figured Mr. Johnson must be overly tired. However, seeing his mentor, usually so calm and composed, now shaking with fear, made him uneasy. Mr. Johnson instructed Jack to grab a bag from the back seat. Jack complied, finding a bag filled with children's candies and small toys. "Throw these in front of the truck," Mr. Johnson ordered. Jack hesitated, confused by the strange request. "Why?" "Just do it," Mr. Johnson snapped, his urgency clear. Jack hurriedly grabbed a handful of candies and tossed them out onto the road. Then, Mr. Johnson turned off the engine and extinguished the headlights, plunging them into complete darkness. They sat in silence, the only sound being the distant hoot of an owl and the rustle of the trees in the wind. Jack could barely breathe, his mind racing with fear and confusion. After what felt like an eternity, Mr. Johnson finally restarted the truck and turned the lights back on. The candies Jack had thrown were gone. Mr. Johnson sighed in relief and began driving again, his hands still trembling on the wheel. "What just happened?" Jack asked, his voice shaky. Mr. Johnson explained in a hushed tone, "Those were not ordinary children. They were spirits, lost souls looking for a way to move on. Offering candies is an old trick to appease them. If you drive long enough, you'll encounter things you can't explain. Sometimes when you're exhausted, you're more susceptible to seeing the supernatural." Jack was intrigued, but also terrified. He wanted to hear more, but sensing Mr. Johnson's unease, he decided not to press further. The rest of the journey passed in tense silence, with both men lost in their thoughts. Years later, Jack had his own encounters with the unknown. Each experience was different, but he always remembered Mr. Johnson's advice. When in doubt, be respectful of what you can't see. And so, dear listeners, as you drive along those lonely roads at night? Remember Jack's story. The darkness hides many secrets, and some roads are best traveled with caution and respect for the unseen. Keep your eyes on the road, and if you ever see something you can't explain, maybe it's best not to stop. Thank you for joining me tonight. Stay safe, and until next time, sweet dreams. Goodbye, dear listeners. Remember to always keep an open mind and a wary heart. Until we meet again, stay vigilant and cherish the light. Hello everyone, welcome to tonight's chilling tale. Make sure you're in a comfortable spot because this story will take you to the edge of your seat and beyond. So sit back, relax, and prepare for a journey into the unknown. In a remote village nestled deep in the mountains, far from the hustle and bustle of the city, there was a place where the roads were treacherous and the nights were long. Our story begins with a man named John who, despite the eerie tales that surrounded the village, decided to visit his relatives who lived there. John was a city man, accustomed to the conveniences and comforts of urban life, but family bonds brought him to this remote corner of the world. After a warm dinner with his relatives, John was ready to return to the city. It was getting dark, and his Aunt Mary urged him to stay the night, insisting that the mountain road was dangerous after sunset. "John, it's better if you stay. This road isn't safe at night. Let Mike, my son, accompany you if you must leave tonight. Tomorrow he can come back by himself." But John, feeling confident and not wanting to trouble anyone, brushed off her concerns. "Don't worry, Aunt Mary. I'll be fine. It's just a road." Mary's eyes darkened. "John, strange things have been happening on that road. People say it's haunted. We've had several accidents there in the past few years." Mike, who was listening, chimed in. "She's not kidding, John. There have been some really weird accidents. People say they've seen a ghost on the road." John laughed nervously, trying to shake off the unease that was creeping up on him, but the seriousness in their eyes made him pause. "All right, Mike, if it makes you feel better, you can come with me." As they drove along the winding, narrow path, the stories Mike had shared with him echoed in John's mind. The road, with its sharp turns and steep cliffs, seemed to close in on them. The moon cast eerie shadows that danced in the periphery of the car's headlights. Mike began to recount the story of a young boy named Billy, who had gone missing 2 years ago. Billy used to take his sheep to graze along this road. One evening, he didn't return. The villagers searched all night, following the path where he used to herd his sheep. They found his flock wandering aimlessly, but Billy was nowhere to be seen. Eventually, they found him, his lifeless body hanging from a tree down the cliff, evidently a victim of a tragic accident. Since then, eerie occurrences had been reported by those who traveled the road at night. One night, a truck driver barely escaped death when he swerved his vehicle to avoid hitting a boy who suddenly appeared on the road covered in blood, with what looked like his entrails dragging behind him. The driver, terrified, lost control and crashed into the mountainside. He survived, but there was no trace of the boy he had seen. As Mike finished the story, John felt a chill run down his spine. He tried to shake it off, attributing it to the cold night air. "Mike, do you remember when exactly this all happened?" John asked, trying to divert his mind. Mike shrugged. "Not really, but it was 2 years ago around this time." A sudden memory flashed in John's mind. He recalled his first visit to the village, which was also 2 years ago. He had driven this very road at night. He remembered being extremely cautious, fearing the treacherous drop off the edge. There was a moment when he encountered a flock of sheep. He had honked his horn, trying to move them off the road. They all huddled toward the mountainside, forcing him to steer dangerously close to the cliff. And then there was that instant, a fleeting moment, when he thought he saw a boy in front of his car. He had slammed on the brakes, heart pounding, convinced he had hit someone. But when he got out to check, there was no one there. He had chalked it up to his nerves and the poor visibility. As John recounted this to Mike, a terrifying thought began to form. Could it be that he had, unknowingly, been involved in the accident that killed Billy? Mike seemed to sense where John's thoughts were going and shared his own uneasy suspicion. Suddenly, John slammed on the brakes. In the beam of the headlights stood a boy. John's breath caught in his throat. The boy was covered in blood, his eyes hollow, and his intestines seemed to trail behind him. John was paralyzed with fear. Mike, with equal terror, whispered, "John, that's Billy." The boy stood there for a moment, then slowly began to walk toward the car. John couldn't take his eyes off him. "I need to see if it's real," John muttered, his voice trembling. He opened the door and stepped out, his legs shaking. The boy vanished. John's heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from his chest. He turned back to the car, only to see Mike and the boy struggling in the front seat. The car suddenly lurched forward, skidding toward the edge of the cliff. John screamed, "Mike, jump!" But it was too late. The car teetered on the edge for a moment before plunging down. John ran to the edge and looked down, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The car had crashed into the trees below, and Mike was hanging from a branch, lifeless. John's knees gave way, and he collapsed on the ground. The haunting image of Billy was burned into his mind. From that day forward, the ghost of Billy was never seen again, and the mountain road, though still perilous, was free from supernatural occurrences. And that, my friends, is the story of John, Mike, and the haunted mountain road. A tale that reminds us that some places hold on to their ghosts, waiting for a moment to remind us of the past. Stay safe and remember, not all stories are just stories. Thank you for joining me tonight. I hope you enjoyed the tale and that it keeps you looking over your shoulder for just a little while longer. Until next time, sweet dreams.